I don't want my glass half full. I want it as full as it can get. Why can't I get it more than half full? I mean, what does a full glass even look like? Why are we not allowing ourselves to just keep filling our glass forever? Welcome to the Ignited Recovery Podcast, a new way forward for anyone looking for answers but feeling left out. If you've been searching for empowerment, triumph, and purpose, you've found them right here. You won't hear the same solutions, and you're not going to have any excuses to fall back on, because Ignited Recovery allows heroes to rise and become their best selves. I'm Dr. Adi Jaffe, and I can't wait to be your guide on this journey. Are you ready to become an ignited hero? Hello, everybody, and welcome to this episode of the Ignited Recovery Secrets Podcast. I'm Adi Jaffe, and we're going to go really, really deep today. And this comes out of memories of what my life used to look like 20, 25 years ago, even 15 years ago. And the fact that I put almost all my effort at looking at what wasn't working well in my life. In a relationship, always looking for signs that things were falling apart. And then when the breakup would happen, always looking at the ways this proved that I was never going to be able to find somebody. When I lost a job, always paying attention to the hardship that caused, not just financially, not just in terms of the money I needed in my life, but the fact that I was now going to have to go look for another job, the embarrassment that was created if I lost a job by being fired and things like that. You know, when I got into an accident, always looking at the pain and the things that I couldn't do because of that accident. I've talked about this before, but I went through a while, right? Like a decade in my life when friends wouldn't call me back, I would focus heavily on that, on their absence and what that meant in my life and the fact that nobody liked me, et cetera, et cetera. And then if you go really deep into my history, and some of you have listened that deeply, my dad walking out, right? Whenever I would look at my dad, I would always see that guy that left us, the guy that abandoned us. I know that this isn't just in my head because I kept a journal, I kept a diary. You know, I was a musician, and that's why I actually moved out to LA at first, was to make music. And so I had a journal where I would write songs and I would write things about my life. And it was 95% terrifyingly sad and depressed. I don't know if you can relate to that or not, but anytime that I would put pen to paper, I was writing about the pain and the misery in my life. Now, that actually made, in my opinion, for some really good songs back then, but not for a very happy life. Now, the way a lot of people talk about that normally is that I was a glass half empty kind of guy. But the thing is, that's not true. That wasn't it at all, actually. I only saw the empty part of the glass. I didn't look at the glass as half empty. I just saw empty. And the reason I think that distinction is important is because I think that setup, are you a half full, half empty glass kind of person, already sets us up for the wrong answer and then the wrong way to look at life. So I'm going to explain why, to some extent, that was the way I lived back then. And I'm doing a workshop on this coming up soon on our basic needs and motivations in life and what makes our life happier and fuller. But I wanted to start you off here today because I think even just listening to what I'm going to talk about here today will help you change that in your life if this is something you struggle with. And let's be honest, we can all use more joy and more fulfillment, right? So even if you're not really struggling with it, I think hearing about it and understanding this way of looking at things will help you get more of it. So here's the thing for me. You can only really focus on one thing at a time. We know this. There's a lot of research that shows this whole notion that we can multitask is just bullshit. We're not good at multitasking. Our brain pays attention to one thing at a time. When you switch, there's actually a little period where your brain is switching and isn't paying attention to anything, and then it just goes to the other thing. If you switch back and forth, you're barely paying attention to any of those. Speaking to you guys who are looking at your phone and thinking you can do 3 or 4 things at a time. So the question is, in your life, looking at your glass, are you focusing on the water, the liquid in it, or are you focusing on the air? Because you're not seeing it as half full. You're seeing it as full. you're not seeing it as half empty. You're seeing it as empty because you're focusing on the full or the empty part of it. And the reason I'm saying it is right off the bat, and I'll get to this again later, but asking the question of are you seeing the glass as half full or half empty, I think is already kind of shitty because you're only seeing it as half full, even if you're looking at the liquid. I hope that makes sense to you, but we're going to dive in deeply now into the needs and motivations of what it is that allows us to even look at our life, analyze the way it's going, and get a sense of how we're doing and how happy we are, how fulfilled we are. I think that a lot of us don't really put too much thought into this, right? We just kind of live our lives until something goes wrong. And if something goes wrong, that's when we start analyzing what's going on for us. And so I'm breaking this up to us into 3 sections. Because first of all, I think we have to talk about the glass. Now, I'm basing everything I'm talking about here today on Maslow's hierarchy of needs work, but then also on other needs and motivations kind of theories, including Richard Ryan and Edward Deci's work. And so there's a lot of research that went into me talking about this, but I want to break it down into you in simple terms. And so we're going to start out with the glass. Because if your glass is going to have any liquid in it, you need to have a glass and it needs to be intact. And to have a glass that can even hold liquid in it, I think there are 3 major factors that you need to feel comfortable about. And that is your safety, your sustenance, your ability to support your physical needs, food, water, things of that nature, and shelter. Right? A lot of us don't have that, especially if we're experiencing trauma, especially if we're in an unsafe environment, and especially if we're struggling with mental health issues or addiction issues that make our safety, maybe even our shelter, and certainly our sustenance at risk. Then your glass has leaks in it. When I talk about my childhood growing up and I talk about my dad leaving us, the moment my dad left us, the reason it was so hard to pay attention to the full things in my life a lot of times is that created a lack of safety in some ways. This notion that I could be abandoned at any moment by one of the people who's supposed to love me more than anything and support me more than anything created a fear of safety. And with that safety not in place, as I kept trying to fill things into my glass, it would leak out. Now, I know that's a really simple example, but I want you to think a little bit. Have there been moments in your life where it almost didn't matter how well things were going? It just wasn't enough. Well, I think this is one of the reasons. Those of us who've experienced trauma, those of us who are going through difficulties in life right now, being scared around our safety, having food issues, being scared of where we're living and lack of safety around that. If those things are happening, then what you have is a glass with holes and cracks in it. And if you have a glass with holes and cracks in it, does it really matter how much liquid you have in it? Not so much. Because it can always leak out no matter how much you put in. So that's the beginning, is we've got to get a glass that is solid. And then the next thing is we have to understand, well, okay, what is the liquid? What is the fluid? When we say half empty, half full, what are we talking about? And to me, that is this notion of joy and fulfillment in life, right? In those times when I was sad and depressed and looking at everything that wasn't working out in my life, I still wanted to feel joy. I just didn't have an understanding of what actually creates that. And so my research into needs and motivation and things of that led me to believing that there are 3 things that create joy and fulfillment for us. And that is connection, having a community, being connected to other people in our lives, right? Feeling like we are part of. Competence, feeling like we're good at something, feeling like what we're doing actually fits our skills, and that when we go to work or when we interact with people, when we do what we do in the world, we're good at it. And if you have connection and competence together, sometimes you actually get validation from your community about your competence, which adds to it. And then, and this is a big one, control. We want to feel like we have some sort of sense of control over our lives, some autonomy in choosing what it is that we decide to do. And so as you move through life, these factors interact. You might feel like you have a lot of connection, but not a lot of competence and no control. Well, that's not going to feel really good. That's not going to feel like it's creating a lot of joy in your life. You might have a lot of competence. You're really, really good at something, but you have no community. And you don't feel like you're in control of when you get to do and when you don't get to do that thing you're great at. Like, let's say you're a musician or something along those lines. We'll talk about that more. Let's say you're a bricklayer. Let's say you do construction. You're really, really great at it, but you're isolated. You have no community, and you don't get to have choice in when you build houses and when you don't. Your joy is going to be really lacking. And so our job is to kind of assess, right? Here's my thing always is, let's look at our life and let's look at control, competence, and connection and see how we're doing in all these different areas of our lives around those. And I can almost guarantee that you will find that the areas where you have less of all three of them are areas where you're not feeling a lot of joy or a lot of fulfillment. So the more of those we have, the more fluid we get, the more liquid we get into our glass that is made up of safety, sustenance, and shelter. And finally, here's the secret sauce. So I need you to listen really, really carefully. And that is the flavor, the fullness, the real richness of that fluid that goes into our glass is determined by our motivation. Because, stay with me here, we feel better about things that we're doing because we want to. This gets a little bit to control, but I'm not even talking about full-on control. I'm talking about that internal feeling you have about things, right? When you're dedicated to them, when it's your purpose, when you're driven to do the thing, you feel really good at it. I mean, I know for a fact, right? The reason I record this podcast and the reason I do all these things for community around addiction is because I have this inner drive to do it. I feel really good about those things that I do. So even when the action is not really fulfilling, because it's tied into my intrinsic or internal motivation, it feels great. But here's the thing. After you're like 3 or 4 years old, the world starts really presenting you with a lot of reasons to act, a lot of external motivation. You're a kid in school and you want people to like you. That is external motivation. You start doing things so that they give you something. Later on, people say, hey, if you do this, I will give you money. That is external motivation. So we start doing things for external motivation. But here's the thing. Even if you have a lot of control, a lot of competence, and a lot of connection, but you're doing everything because of external reasons, that secret sauce is missing. And you don't feel as good about how your life is going. Your joy and your fulfillment is not as complete. So the secret is, and like I said, I'm going to do a whole workshop on this, and I'll announce when that is. Maybe we'll even have it in the show notes by the time this comes out. But I think that a lot of the secret sauce, a lot of the way to align yourself so you can fill your cup as much as possible, is to take the external motivators and turn them into intrinsic motivations. Now, I want to give an example because that can sound really complicated to a lot of people. But I've worked with a lot of really wealthy people and a lot of celebrities at this point in my career. And having competence, being amazingly good at something, DJing, acting, making money, building things, real estate development, etc., is powerful. And I've worked with people who are amazingly good at each one of those things, and you see it, you can feel the competence in them. And they have control, right? They have the power to stop when they want to stop, to keep going when they want to keep going. They control it. And because of that competence and control, and oftentimes the money that comes along with it, they have a lot of connection. But what I've noticed is a lot of times they lose the drive somewhere along the way. And it's painful to watch somebody who has lost the internal motivation to do the thing that is getting him joy and fulfillment in life. Because it's like you see the light come out of their eyes. It's just like, it just dims. They're still good at it. People still love them all over the world and are hanging on to them for dear life. And they still technically have the control, but the external motivators have now become so strong. The money so big, the love from fans so massive, the news coverage so intense that it's hard for them to make this leap of saying, you know what? Yes, there are external reasons to do it, but I am really driven by it. And so I think it's important for us to look at what our external motivators are and start aligning them with us, integrating those motivators internally to us so that we can have an internal sense, an intrinsic motivating force to push us forward. Because without it, it can look amazing to everybody else and inside it can feel dead. Now, like I started out saying, I used to always look for what's wrong. I felt like it was my job. My competence was great at paying attention to the things that I can fix, the things I thought needed healing, the things I thought needed attending to, or at least being acknowledged, right? And that's where the songwriting and all that kind of stuff came in from. I talked about it as being a realist. But here's the thing. There is no realist. Real is the thing you decide to pay attention to. Real is the thing that you decide to give energy to. Real is the thing you focus your attention on, because what you focus your attention on is what your world becomes, because we can only pay attention to one thing at a time. So here's the thing. If we want our life to be about joy, fulfillment, and impact, and that's what I believe a lot of us want, then the whole glass half full, half empty sets you up the wrong way. Because first of all, we're not asking the question about, is our glass ready to be filled? And then once it is, let's stop looking at it as if it can even be filled up. Let's stop looking at it as if we're stuck only being able to get it half full. Instead, let's pay attention to the things that make our glass whole and then the factors that allow us to keep pouring more and more joy and fulfillment into our glass. I don't want my glass half full. I want it as full as it can get. Why can't I get it more than half full? What does a full glass even look like? Why are we not allowing ourselves to just keep filling our glass forever? It never gets filled. It just keeps filling and filling and filling. And what's the worst thing that happens if we do fill it all the way to the top and all of a sudden our joy and fulfillment overflows from our glass? All that'll happen is it'll spill onto somebody else's glass. Maybe even if it's a glass under us, fill it. And that sounds like a pretty good thing to me. So, I'm big on language, but let's stop limiting ourselves with half full. And let's not bullshit ourselves that when we're looking at half empty, we actually recognize that there's some fluid in there. We're not. And so if you want more joy, if you want a better relationship, if you want a better career and more money, you've got to shift your perspective on this. You've got to start looking at where are the things in your life that are not allowing your glass to sustain itself, and then go after the control, go after the competence. Make sure you're doing things in an arena of life that you feel good about, and go after that connection. Those are the things that are going to keep filling and filling and filling your glass, and hopefully you'll spill a little onto us. Thank you so much, everybody, for listening. I hope this was useful for you. Go to ignited.com, join our list, or go to ignitedrecovery.com and join my recovery list for those of you who might need help with mental health, addiction issues, and things like that. On that email list, we will definitely announce when the workshop for this comes up. And maybe if it's ready, if I have a link ready for you, it might be in the show notes right now. One of the things that I'll tell you, this is a little fun thing for you guys right now, is if you go to ignited.com/secret, ignited.com/secret, you will get a Wheel of Life assessment that allows you to check out how you feel about the areas of your life and then go deeper and see if control or competence or connection play a role in the areas that you don't feel great about. And it'll give you a recovery roadmap, which is the map that I had to follow to get through and beat my addiction forever. And so if you struggle or you know anybody else who struggles, you can have that as well. ignited.com/secret. Enjoy.
Thank you for tuning in to the Ignited Heroes Recovery Podcast. I really hope you found the information here useful and that we'll see you back here next week. And look, I want to make sure that this podcast is the most useful it can be for you, so please let me know by emailing info@ignited.com if there are any specific topics or questions you'd like to have addressed. As usual, if you like this episode, I would love for you to leave us a 5-star review and rating. Thanks, and see you next week.